I love the mecha genre. I always have, whether it be toys, cartoons, anime, comics, weeaboo comics, or movies. Mecha never fails to entertain me, and when Pacific Rim's first trailer came out in 2013, I was beyond excited. And when I saw it in theaters, I was absolutely stunned. It was everything I wanted and more, and I couldn't wait for the sequel the moment I heard it was getting one. 5 years later, it came out, and as you can tell by the title of this video, Pacific Rim's sequel was severely lacking. But before I get into what exactly was wrong with Pacific Rim Uprising, I need to explain why Pacific Rim was good in the first place. Mecha doesn't tend to have much variation, and typically follows the same theme in each show or movie of a special forces military group fighting for humanity against aliens, and that's basically what Pacific Rim is. A select group fighting giant alien monsters called kaiju, which is apparently its own genre that is literally just defined as giant monsters destroying cities, and I absolutely love how simple and to the point that is. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that while each one presents a different story, although I'd argue some aren't exactly aware of what a story even is, they are all basically the same, whether it be Voltron, or shitty Voltron, or even shittier Voltron, or new Voltron, and countless other mecha shows. They are all more or less the same at their core. It's not horrible, but it's why when one like Pacific Rim comes out, it's just so much better. Pacific Rim's biggest advantage is the same thing that made the first Iron Man movie so good: the director. Anyone could have directed Iron Man, but Jon Favreau didn't just make one of the best superhero films of all time, he also set up the building blocks for a franchise with a dozen plus films and many more to come out over the next decade. And while anyone could have made the movies look good, it's the touches that Favreau did that made it great. Robert Downey Jr. definitely lended to that, but I don't think that without Favreau, it'd be even a tenth of how good it was. From Ensign Ho to Obadiah Stane, from start to finish, everything is cohesive and feels real, and those reasons are the same reasons why Pacific Rim was so good. The director, Guillermo del Toro. Now, I'm sure most of you know who he is, but for those of you that don't, he's better known for directing both Hellboy films, Pan's Labyrinth, Crimson Peak, and that fish fucking movie that got an Oscar like a month ago that I'm still not convinced isn't Guillermo's Hellboy spinoff smut fanfiction about Abe Sapien that he just couldn't get the rights to make no matter how hard he tried, so he gave up and made it his own film. He also directed a small film called Blade 2. Guillermo was very involved with the CGI production for all the fight scenes in the movie, making sure the lighting was good, the colors looked good, and the water itself. All this combined made the movie a piece of art. Take this scene for instance. Right there. Every single bit of that is CGI, and every bit of it is intentional. And it looks beautiful. Even the kaiju here, Leatherback, looks like an actual creature in the water. Furthermore, the way Guillermo used the bright lights while they're fighting in Hong Kong against the dark backdrop of a storm and dark robots and monsters made all that seem more realistic. And more importantly, unique. The film was set in reality, albeit a decade or two into the future, but every bit of it was meant to show how we're still surviving. We're still fighting. We're still here despite everything. It fits the same theme every other mecha film and show does, but it does it so differently and so artistically that it feels completely new, completely different, and as real as a movie about giant monsters coming out of the base of the fucking Pacific Ocean can be. Another reason this movie was so good is that each and every kaiju in the film, I think there was like 7 or 8, all looked, moved, and attacked differently. They acted like they were actual animals with different characteristics, and while Jon Favreau's Iron Man used its dialogue and acting to be great, Pacific Rim didn't necessarily have that. It more than made up for it in its artistry, which is all because of Guillermo. Now, all of this makes Pacific Rim a good movie and fun to watch, and I really enjoyed it, but I'm sure you're probably wondering why I've talked about how good of a job Guillermo did on the first instead of what's wrong with the sequel. Everything I've said in praise about the first is what was missing from the second. The obvious reason why is because Guillermo didn't direct it. He was producer, but Stephen S. DeKnight was the director, and he brought none of the effort that Guillermo did. It was his directorial debut in film, so I imagine it was a big change for him, and I imagine it was very difficult. And while it's not horrible, it's far from it, but the two films feel like completely separate movies in completely different worlds. The first is dark and gritty, and the second is more bright and fast, but somehow has less of a vibrant color palette. Take the kaiju in the movie, for instance. There are these, which are red and look more or less extremely similar. So similar, I can't tell which is which in the footage I have, and then you have this one. The only kaiju in the movie that's actually interesting, and not once in the whole movie, is there a fight scene involving the Robo-Kaiju versus a Jaeger. It was the most wasted concept I've ever seen in a film, with the exception of the double-bladed lightsaber never being reused. There is a neat scene where it's Jaeger versus Jaeger, and it does look nice, especially the setting where it is, but it doesn't have any of the artistic style from the first one that Guillermo did. Overwhelmingly, this film was just disappointing. John Boyega and the rest of the cast did alright, Scott Eastwood was okay, and while, as I said, the cast was nowhere near the main reason the first was good, the apathy the story had for these characters beyond contrived situations that don't lead to anything other than a cliche redemption arc, it makes any scene in it without a Jaeger incredibly boring. Okay, I take that back. There was one scene that was pretty good, but it was still pretty boring overall, and a movie like this shouldn't be boring. Despite most of the Jaegers not being as unique and battle-hardened as they were in the first one, they weren't boring to watch fight, and as frustrated as I was with how bright and generic the fights were, and how disappointing it was when I realized that without Guillermo it just wasn't going to be as good as the first, it was fine. It was fine. If you're like me and you enjoy mecha stuff, you'll like it. Not as much as the first, but you'll still like it. I definitely enjoyed it, but I don't review this stuff based on my personal opinions. I try to be as objective as possible. Sometimes my opinions fit with how the movie was, and sometimes it doesn't. In the case of Pacific Rim Uprising, I did enjoy it. Nowhere near as much as the first, but it's not that bad of a mecha film. And I do hope that it gets a sequel, so long as Guillermo del Toro comes back. So yeah, I give it a 6 out of 10. If you like mecha stuff or Pacific Rim, go see it. Just reel in your expectations. And if you'd like to see my comprehensive ratings, check out the IMDb list I have, and I also made a song. Links for all of that will be in the description down below. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and comment what movies or subjects you'd like to see me talk about next. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. And as always, I'll see you in the next video. Shout out to Shadowverse for this week's Fan Art of the Week. If you'd like to have your art featured in a video, draw me or Chad the Sad and tweet it to Tahukan TV on Twitter. Huge thank you to Patreon supporters Anonymous and Matt Porter. I really appreciate it.